The effort to preserve and protect Great Plains grasslands is a fight that crosses state lines, and it requires ranchers, landowners, and a variety of groups to work together. Joining me now to talk about these efforts are NRCS leaders from 4 states: Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota. Thanks all for your time. The Great Plains are really home to some of the last true prairies in the world. Can you tell us about the grasslands in each of your states and their conditions?
So in Oklahoma, probably the major grasslands that we have is the tall, mid, and short grass prairies. And the condition that we have is a lot of encroachment. So we've lost a lot of what we historically had as native tall grass prairies especially, and in the short grass prairies.
Yeah, in Kansas, like Oklahoma, we have 3 primary landscape features: tall grass prairie, mixed grass prairie, and short grass prairie. And like Oklahoma, where our tall grass and mixed grass prairies are under extreme pressure from woody encroachment, our short grass prairies are also facing that to some degree, but also the other risk of tillage or conversion.
In Nebraska, it's the mixed grass prairie. We do have several intact larger areas of the prairie, but we are seeing the woody encroachment come into place as well in Nebraska.
For South Dakota, we really transition from west to east, short grass prairie to mixed grass prairie to tall grass prairie. And we are under threat of woody encroachment, mostly coming from the south, but in South Dakota, we are still sitting in a position where at least compared to the other 4 states, we have probably the greatest chance to get ahead of this.
You all have mentioned woody encroachment. It's definitely a threat to these grasslands. What are all your states doing to start addressing this and working with landowners and other groups to get ahead of it, to stay ahead of it, and really keep these grasslands intact or get them back intact?
Yeah, and in Kansas, when we initially started our discussions with our producers or ranchers, we were looking at what those threats were, what the science was indicating to us on that woody encroachment, and then laying out an opportunity for an initiative, if you will, an effort to address that woody encroachment in 3 focal areas in the state of Kansas. And so with that, then we did roll out an initiative that really kind of amplified the need of the local rancher, again, being science-driven and being supported by the agencies and the partnerships in the state of Kansas.
I'd say one of the best tools that we have is fire and mechanical treatment of these woody species.
And in Nebraska?
In Nebraska, we focused on 4 core areas across the state. And we really worked with our private landowners to implement 3 conservation practices with the private landowners, the ranchers: prescribed burning, brush management, and pest management. So that's what we're doing in Nebraska.
For South Dakota, we are working with our conservation partners across the state to identify priority areas to really focus our funding across the state. But one of the most important things we're looking at is landowner education.
So you mentioned an initiative. How are your states working to organize these efforts through the Great Plains Grasslands Initiative?
Like the other states, working with our partners has been a big thing. And then the ranchers, the landowners that we have, those are really our key partners in being able to implement these practices and the know-how and getting the word out on this and the woody encroachment that we have. And so I think that voice has been one of our biggest help that we can have with the NRCS in this project.
So there's a lot of great conservation efforts underway with key partners through this initiative. How does that fit into USDA's commitment to and focus on climate-smart agriculture?
Yeah, great question. So Climate Smart is really about building a resilient climate base, using the prairies that we have in the biome. And so the primary threats, right, are the risk of conversion and woody encroachment. And I think probably the operative for us is looking at the prevented loss, right, of our prairies. And by that, we're keeping, the intent is to keep grass or prairie and intact. And then the second item is really trying to suppress or push back against the woody encroachment. Again, you know, our grass prairies, our prairies really do the best job below ground of storing carbon, right? And above ground is just what we see, but the realization for us in our prairies is to manage effectively, right, the below ground effort of what that root system does. So just keeping grass, and keeping the woody encroachment off our prairies.
Well, speaking of keeping grass, I'd ask one final question of all of you. Our audience is cattle producers that are using this grass to turn and make food. So what's your advice to all of them about getting engaged in this effort and why it's so important to keep these ecosystems intact?
Majority of our producers, they're a generational producer. This education, it's important to understand that this woody encroachment takes away production. When we don't have that production, we can't run as many cattle. We don't have the wildlife, because a lot of us also depend on the hunting to keep the business going. And so this opportunity to work with us and to push back the woody encroachment keeps that family land very productive, and in turn, hopefully it keeps it coming or staying in the family for generations to come.
And they're really a key partner in all of this too, aren't they?
The advantage of working together, right, is that community-based infrastructure that we gain all the way up the food chain to getting beef on the table, right, which is really where the production side of things ends for our ranchers, is selling that. And so I think just that idea of a community-based approach and trying to generate enthusiasm and realizing, just like what Oklahoma mentioned, is feeling that pressure, right, is really, really incredible upon our ranchers.
You mentioned in South Dakota you have a chance to sort of get ahead of this issue a little bit. What's your message to producers in South Dakota to help?
Well, roughly over half of South Dakota, so 48 million acres, is grazing land. We do have a chance to get in front of this. Between our grazing operations, our producers, and wildlife, these are two industries that are just critical for South Dakota's way of life. And woody encroachment and invasive species in general is a direct threat to this way of life. So this is our opportunity to get on board and make a difference.
And in Nebraska?
I think that it really comes down to productivity, and it's our passion to keep the rangeland and the grassland productive, so our farmers and ranchers can keep growing the cows out there. And so that's the most important thing. And I would encourage the ranchers to stop in at their local USDA office and work one-on-one with the conservation planner to see exactly what they can do specific to their operation.
Well, I really appreciate not only your time with us here, but really all that you're doing to lead your state's efforts in the fight against this. I think there's no doubt that we need to keep, grasslands like we're standing in today available for use for good. Thank you all so much for joining us.
To learn more about assistance available through Working Lands for Wildlife, contact your local USDA Service Center or visit the website nrcs.usda.gov.